Hello everyone, my name is Meghan LeVota and I offer wisdom, tools, and support for personality integration. And today I'm going to be discussing and reflecting on some of the concepts in the book Personality Type and Owner's Manual, a practical guide to understanding yourself and others through typology by Lenore Thomson. This marks the first book in the Typology Reading Challenge 2020 that me and Your Chill ISFJ and many others are, I believe, participating in. Whether or not you chose to participate, I want to make sure that for those of you who have not read this book, that you can get some value from it. And I am going to link below the video in which I described all of the books for the Typology Reading Challenge in case you want to pick up and join. All you have to do is pretty much read the book by the end of the month and then share your thoughts either on YouTube or Twitter, on Facebook, or whatever social media you want with the hashtag Typology Reading Challenge 2020. Next month, we're doing Susan Storm from Psychology Junkie's book, Discovering You, so that's going to be linked below as well. So just jumping right into this, there's literally so much that I can say about this book. It was one of the first typology books I ever read. Not the first. I believe the first was Please Understand Me Too by David Keirsey. But this is the one that really transformed my perspective. And through reading this, I felt as though I understood the cognitive functions enough to start explaining them to other people and to start using them as sort of a vocabulary for what I'm going through. And honestly, if it wasn't for this book, I don't know if I would have had the confidence to even start sharing about personality typology, because at least, so Lenore here is a Jungian analyst. She's the former managing editor of the Jungian journal Quadrant, and she's taught courses on psychological types at the C.G. Jung Foundation in New York City. She's an INTJ, and so the NI is strong in this book. I'll tell you that. And for me reading this, she really grasped the NI essence of what personality really is, how you should be using type, what the cognitive functions really are, and things like that. And so with that understanding, it honestly allowed me to feel confident enough to even start digging deeper into this stuff. So that I really appreciate. There are other books out there, such as Please Understand Me Too by David Keirsey, where I would say that book is a little bit better for beginners if you were just wanting to just get started. This book is pretty good for beginners as well. But as far as like really transforming the way you look at personality, this definitely does a really good job. I might be just biased because of all the NI in here, but as far as me reflecting on this book, I want to talk a little bit about each of the functions and a little bit about some of the key points. Like, I guess really the main value of this book in general is that it really orients you toward why you should even care about personality typology. I believe I'm going to be doing, so here, let me just start by saying another thing that I really like about this book is that there's a free test that comes with it. Is that if you don't know what your type is, there is a very reliable test in here, and she explains how to interpret the results as well as common mistypes and things to look out for. So that's very helpful. I did already film a video of me taking this test and my answers, but I'm not done editing it yet. And so that is probably going to go up sometime next week. I apologize that I don't have it, but I will say that I did test as an ENFJ, which I was very happy about, and I really enjoyed the J and P questions. They were really good, and it really captured the difference of J and P in my understanding. That was more focused on the motives behind the J and P rather than how messy are you, how organized are you, things like that. There are definitely some online tests that I think link conscientiousness a little bit too much with J and P, where you can be any level of conscientiousness or of conscientious. You could be whatever level of that, no matter what type you are. So I think she goes into later on, I'll talk about this more, about how both J's and P's, they view freedom differently. And that's really interesting to me because I very much value freedom, and there are other things about my personality that in some tests might come off as a P, despite like very much resonating with the FE and NI descriptions. So I think, yeah, so be on the lookout for that video. And also I am going to be doing another video where I really reflect on the FE and NI descriptions. There's just not enough time to really go into it today. I have too much other things that I want to get into, and you know, I definitely encourage you to read the book if you're interested, because as far as the cognitive function descriptions, she gives really great examples. She uses Star Trek as like an example for a lot of the functions, so you can kind of see the functions in action through a story, which is really nice. So the first thing that I want to read is this metaphor about an elephant that is used, that I think anybody who's interested in typology should have this sort of metaphor in their back pocket, because it's a really great understanding of like how to even think about these things. So actually, before I go into that, I want to say, quote, this is about Jung and the cognitive functions here. Quote, "It was an attempt to invent a vocabulary for unseen dimensions of psychological reality, to capture an experience otherwise difficult to talk about. So type theory in this respect is a description of, not a prescription for, human behavior." I think if you take anything out of this book, it's that, to be very honest. At least for me, the best, the thing that is the most exciting to me about the cognitive functions is that it gives me a word to explain like what is already happening. And so I think that cognitive functions, they're like tools and like a word to really talk about reality in a deeper level. I don't really view this as like a strict taxonomy in which each function has like a strict definition, because I think that the concept is what is consistent, and that the words can only do what they can to describe the phenomenon of the concept. So here's a story. It's an old story about 4 people and an elephant in the dark. An elephant belonging to a traveling exhibition has been stabled near a town where no elephant had been before. 4 curious citizens, hearing of the hidden wonder, went to see if they can get a preview of it. When they arrived at the stable, they found that there was no light. The investigation therefore had to be carried out in the dark. One, touching its trunk, thought that the creature must resemble a horsepipe. The second felt an ear and concluded that it was a fan. The third, feeling a leg, could liken it only to a living pillar, and when the fourth put its hand on its back, it was convinced that it was some kind of throne. None could form the complete picture, and the part which each felt, he could only refer to it in terms of things which he already knew. The result of the expedition was confusion. Each was sure that he was right. None of the other townspeople could understand what had happened, what the investigators had actually experienced. So using this story, think of reality as the elephant, and each personality type or each function only has its hands on one aspect of the reality, and the rest is in the dark. And that's why there's so many confusions and clashes between types, because they are feeling into something that you quite literally are not feeling into. So it's really important, especially in the type community, as those of us who, honestly, we are leaders in understanding that, you know, cognition exists. the basic theory that Jung even put out there is that each of us have a different lens in which we use reality, and that different way of viewing reality is what influences our personalities at the end of the day. So I personally believe that those of us that are in the type community that are interested in this stuff, like, we are leaders in understanding the fact that not everybody views reality in the same way as we do. And so it's so important to be compassionate and understanding to others that have a different type pattern than you, because again, at the end of the day, they're feeling into something differently. And so it's important to remember that when we're discussing these cognitive functions. Even the definitions themselves, you might find that you don't resonate with a certain definition as much as another. And maybe that's because they're viewing your cognitive function through a different lens. So I want to just share a few quotes and then reflect on them. I did prepare a little bit of that, of these like main points here. So here's a quote. For Jung, understanding one's own type is the alpha and the omega of the individuation process. Without this insight, there's little chance of true realization or development as an individual. I thought that that was very important to discuss. For those of you who are not familiar with the individuation process, I do have a video in which I've discussed this. It's a topic I'm very passionate about, and I plan on sharing more in my channel. So if you ever have any questions about that, just leave a comment and let me know, because I want to dive into that deeper. But the essence of it is that each of us are unaware of our full self, and our ego attaches to certain aspects of the self. And the journey of self-actualization and enlightenment is through integrating the parts of the collective unconscious and the shadow into ourselves. So it's quite literally shining a light on your shadow and on your darkness and becoming more aware of the full self. And with personality type, we have our dominant function and our auxiliary function that are way stronger than any of the other 8 cognitive functions. But because we're human, we're able to tap into all 8. And so Carl Jung, he not only talked about psychological types and the 8 cognitive functions, he also did so much work on the collective unconscious and the individuation process. And so it's important to realize that whether or not you agree with what Jung is saying about that the same man invented or discussed both of these ideas, and so they're kind of connected in the same, by like similar threads. And you know, understanding your type really can help you understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, and also what areas and what functions you could be more aware of, and which strengths you should attempt to maximize and play into. You know, I don't think type is the only path to enlightenment or truth or anything. A lot of people don't use it at all. They might use astrology, they might use tarot, they might use just NLP or Enneagram. I think there's lots of different tools that can help you through that individuation process. But I do personally believe that personality type reflects the cognitive pattern of integration so perfectly. And you know, there are other ways of integrating. You can integrate your past experience, you can integrate, you know, uncomfortable emotions. There's all this stuff with like shadow work that you can do. You can like balance your chakras. There's other things that you can do that are not as mental. But I do think that this tool is Jung said it's the alpha and omega of the individuation process. Like, that's a pretty strong statement. So I also want to discuss another quote in the book, which is, when we choose possibilities that come easiest to us, we are filled with energy and engaged with life. So I thought that was interesting, because Lenore Thomson kind of was discussing how each of us have inborn potential, and to follow the individuation process is through realizing that potential and going down that path until it's all integrated, right? And we have inborn potential, yet part of being human is that you have to make choices to move forward. Like, you're not ever going to be able to tap into all the potential. I thought that this was pretty NI of her even explaining this in a way. But every time you make a choice, you're leaving untapped potential behind. And so, quote, what we shape feels like us. And she said that some functions we leave behind. And this sort of growth process, it's like as we go from babies to adults, we continue moving in one direction so that we keep like leaving these other functional processes behind as we grow. And there's this sort of natural inborn component to personality typology that's pretty agreed upon in all systems as far as I'm aware. Some systems discuss the element of nature a lot more than others, but it's pretty consistent that there is this sort of inborn pattern that like flows through you, and there's something natural about personality. And she also discussed that, you know, all of our neural networks in the brain, it can sort of, she says, neural circuitry can take on a life of its own, and established neural networks become easier for us. And that's kind of how our dominant cognitive function works. Like, the more you lean into it, which I think we're all naturally predisposed to lean into some, you have to leave others behind, because in order to grow and have a strength in one type of functioning, it's like you can't do everything. That was an interesting point that I thought she made. And she also talked a little bit about how Jung even developed this theory that I thought was really interesting. And I guess he began to notice that other psychologists and him were disagreeing on things. Freud thought that the core motivation was unconscious sexual desire, whereas Adler, I'm not sure how you say that, believed that humans were motivated to establish power. And Jung believed that we were motivated to adapt to our environments. So here is a quote from the book. What if we see reality differently based on our psychological type? What if each view can maintain its own integrity? I think that is a very interesting way to think about how Jung was noticing that other people had different theories for why humans were the way they were and what motivated them, and kind of realized that as opposed to saying you're wrong, you're right, he kind of took this holistic view of you're right and you're right and you're right. And it said in the book that Jung was taking an intuitive approach, whereas Freud was taking a feeler approach focused on the desire and pleasure as the main motivation, and that Adler was taking a thinking approach. They don't go into that much, so I'm not really quite sure there about all of the correlations, but I thought that was interesting to share. And also, so there are all these correlations with different systems that I want to bring up. Feeling, sensing, thinking, and intuition are the four main functions, and those are connected to the four elements: water, earth, air, and fire. And then there's also the suits in tarot. There are, I can't remember where this one's from, but soul, senses, mind, and spirit. I think that's just sort of a spiritual way of looking at it. There are the four Greek temperaments. And so I want to go into these correlations as well, but I also want to say that Lenore Thomson also brought up that we see this number 4, we see it everywhere, sort of in culture, and we seem to be drawn to movies that demonstrate this and bands that demonstrate this, and we're all just inherently fascinated by this whole, like, the 4 thing. And so she brings up the Beatles as an example of the 4 that sort of exemplify the 4 functions. So I want to share with you these associations. So feeling is associated with water. It's associated with cups in tarot. It is associated with the soul. It is associated with phlegmatic temperament and the Greek temperaments. And I guess Paul from the Beatles is more associated with feeling. And then sensing is associated with earth, pentacles in tarot, senses, melancholic temperament, and Ringo from the Beatles. And then thinking is associated with air and swords from tarot, mind, the choleric temperament, and John from the Beatles. And intuition is associated with fire. It's associated with wands in tarot, spirit, the sanguine temperament in Greek temperaments, and George from the Beatles. So those are just some cool associations that, you know, made my NI really happy, because it's just validating to see that these patterns really are everywhere and we aren't just making stuff up. So yeah, and another interesting point to share is that sensing and intuition are based on direct experience. A lot of times we talk about just sensing as direct experience, but intuition itself is also experience. It's just an intuitive experience. You're experiencing it like not physically, and those experiences are just as valid, and I'll get into examples of that later. And then thinking and feeling are the functions that organize the experience rationally. So the main value that I want to bring to you guys is just honestly sharing that she has these really great like tidbits, or what do I want to call it? Examples of what it's like for an infant to develop these functions and how the functions begin in nature. And I think that that is a very important and telling way to describe how these functions even came to be. So I'm going to talk about the dichotomies, like each dichotomy, by first sharing some bullet points about each, and then I'm going to share an anecdote about how the function came to be. And I'm going to do that for all the dichotomies, and then I'm going to just sort of discuss toward the end. So the first letter of a psychological type is E or I. So that stands for extroversion and introversion. But here are how it's defined according to Lenore, is that extroverts sorry, please bear with me. Extroverts define themselves in terms of externals, things that others will recognize and respond to. Extroverts are stimulated by the claims, pleasures, and obligations of the outer world, the people, things, and events that constitute external reality. Extroverts act before reflecting. They are influenced by and gauge their worth by the expectations and attention of others. They're straightforward, understandable, and accessible. They are outgoing, sometimes highly expressive, but may not recognize their own needs. And on the other hand, introverts, they consider their own viewpoint the arbiter of reality, and they define the externals in terms of it. They're more aware of purely mental phenomena, the impressions, facts, ideas, and reactions that constitute an inner world. They reflect before acting. They may defend themselves against the expectations and attention of others. They are reserved, complicated, and private. They are self-aware, sometimes passionately intense, but may not realize their effect on others. So that was really interesting to me. And I also just think it's interesting as just sort of an exercise of understanding, like, let's say FE versus FI, or TI versus TE. If you can just go through the extroverted and introversion like traits and think about, how is FE that way? How is TE that way? How is SE that way? How is NE that way? It's really interesting because, like, for example, it says they're straightforward, understandable, and accessible for extroverts. So feeling is straightforward about its emotions. It's understandable about its emotions. It's accessible. And, thinking is straightforward about its logic. And sensing is straightforward about how it engages with the sensory. And then NE, intuition, it's very straightforward about the concept. It's very easy to grasp concepts when you're listening to an NE Dom because they know how to almost simplify the ideas when they're talking about it. A little bit more than NI users can, where NI, when you're talking about intuition, they're more self-aware of their ideas. They're more passionately intense about their ideas. They may not realize their effect on others when it comes to their ideas. So I think that that's an interesting way to look at it. So talking about extrovert and introvert babies, I'm going to go into an anecdote from the book. Confronted with a new and exciting toy, some babies react with initial interest, but are quickly bored and shift their attention elsewhere. Other babies reacted with great intensity, become overwhelmed, and burst into tears. So the extroverted part of the brain requires an outward goal to stay involved, and extroverts become restless below certain levels of stimulation. These are still her words. And the introverted part of the brain is constantly processing sensory input and relating it to an internal agenda. So introverts can be quickly overtaxed by too much external input. I thought it was really interesting how she brought up the baby example, because I think of extroverts as like the baby that throws the toy away and is ready for a new toy like very quickly. I mean, it's kind of a stereotype. I mean, you think about, especially EP types, either like getting distracted by the newest toy, and like, EJs are kind of that way as well. Like EJs like need to do something. It could be sort of restless. But then I think about the introverted baby like having a fine time on their own, not really needing a toy and like crying because it's just too much. And so another thing that Lenore said that I think is important to discuss is that the opposite is also true, in the sense that extroverts are also depleted and can feel very overtaxed by too much inner mentation, she says. So that's not often talked about when it comes to extroversion and introversion. It's often just talking about how introverts are so overwhelmed by people. And really you have to think about how each cognitive function does that in its own way, where, for example, ENTJs and ESTJs might also be very overwhelmed by people despite being extroverts, because it's their logic that's extroverted. So moving on to sensing and intuition. I'm going to read the bullet points for this. Sensation gives us an appreciation for objective facts and circumstances as perceived by the senses. Sensation gives excellent powers of observation, an investment in life as it exists right now, in all its glorious particulars, satisfaction in the pleasures and security of the material reality, pragmatism and precision, an emphasis on utility and literalism, a need to absorb all the facts, no matter how long it takes before attempting to understand them, a reliance on past experience when solving problems, the inability to believe or rely on something without sensory evidence, and a sense of joy in consuming, processing, or possessing and using things the way that they were meant to be used. Now, moving on here to intuition. Intuition gives us an appreciation for the larger picture or underlying pattern beyond the reach of the senses, a vivid power of imagination, an investment in future possibility, the wonder of things to come, a fascination with the unknown, the hidden, and the unseen, inspiration and enthusiasm, an emphasis on originality and alternate meaning, a tendency to get the whole picture on the basis of just a few salient facts, a reliance on ingenuity when solving problems, the inability to feel motivated unless something new, or the inability to feel motivated unless something new can be anticipated, and some resistance to material possession and responsibility as potentially entrapping. I thought that that was really interesting, especially how it talks about how sensors can be a little bit overly literal, whereas intuition can get the picture with just a few details. It really makes you think that intuitives, perhaps we assume a little bit too much, that we might know what we're talking about, at least sometimes. And I think intuitives can sort of judge sensors as not getting it fast enough, when sometimes you really just need to be patient, because sensors aren't stupid. Like, you just need to give them the direct experience, because sensors tend to be very curious about, having the experience. They just might not want to just take your word for it just because you have an idea about it. So here is the anecdote about how sensing and intuition came to be. Quote, "Even as infants, we are not locked into the external present. We spend a great time anticipating the future. We hear footsteps in the hall and we realize that someone's about to come into the room. We see sunlight on the dresser and we know that the household will soon be in motion. This is how intuition first makes its appearance." I absolutely love that this was in there, because here's the thing. Intuition is so over romanticized in the type community. Like, it can be like very psychic in some cases. It can be just very much a savant when it comes to creativity. But sometimes, you could be, just saying, you could be an intuitive and be really boring, okay? Or you could be a sensor and be very, creative and interesting. So this is just a very mundane, boring example of how intuition works. And I think that it's important to have, boring intuition representation, because it's not always that exciting. Sometimes it really is just being a step ahead on something, or, seeing a connection to something. Everybody can do that. Just as we all feel and we all think, we all can use our intuitive function in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to move on to thinking and feeling here for a moment. So here are the bullet points about thinking. Thinking gives us the ability to make decisions impersonally based on logic, analysis, and efficient tactics, an interest in how things work, a reliance on justice, ethics, fair play, and quality, a commitment to intellectual freedom, freedom of conscious and individual rights, the ability to anticipate and plan for obstacles realistically, an interest in casual relationships and the general laws. I meant causal. Okay, an interest in causal relationships and the general laws they imply. A good sense of narrative structure and sequence, how the beginning leads step by logical step to a conclusion. Whereas feeling, on the other hand, gives us the ability to make decisions personally based on shared values and relationship, an interest in how people feel, a reliance on consensus, morality, mercy, and loyalty, a commitment to social obligation, empathy, and responsibility to others, the ability to anticipate people's needs and reactions, an interest in human relationships and the values they illustrate, a good sense of body language and vocal intonation, how something was said and why. I thought that this was really interesting in how they described this, because I think it's important to realize that, thinking is very tactical. When it comes to making a decision, thinking is more likely to come up with a plan that is going to be tactical. Like TI might come up with a process that makes sense, whereas TE might just come up with more of a general plan, but it's still efficient step by step. But it's feeling that really helps you decide what you even value enough to go toward. So thinkers, yes, you could be very tactical in your plans, but do you even want to achieve that thing, that's where feeling gets the upper hand there. Where thinking knows how things work and feeling is concerned with how people feel. So feeler is also probably more aware of how they feel and how the certain plan is going to affect how other people feel. I really like how it's said that thinking is able to anticipate and plan around obstacles, where feeling is focused on the emotional realm of that, of knowing people's needs and how they're going to react to the plan itself, or how people might react to the obstacles. And yeah, thinking with the causal relationships thing, it's very like looking at the cause and effect of things, but feeling looks at the cause and effect of people. It's like, if you say this, then this person might feel this way, or if I feel this way, this might cause this emotional thing. And so I thought that was interesting. I do definitely think I can tell that, you know, an INTJ wrote this a little bit. Nothing wrong with that, but I do think, I mean, there were just little things I would tweak in the sense that, you know, why is it not causal for it to be like an emotion causing something? I'm not sure. But yeah, so on to the anecdote about how we develop this. So this is about when we first develop ideas about our experience. So with sensing and intuition being the experience itself, feeling and thinking is how we interpret that experience. Quote, some experiences feel good and we like them. We smile and laugh and show our pleasure, attempting to make them happen again. Some of our experiences feel bad. We fuss and cry and we push people away. This is the first natural use of the feeling function. We're not only building up our ideas about how things are and using those ideas to give our world rational coherence, which would be thinking, by the way. We're also making judgments about what is happening to us. We're deciding what is important to us. So thinking is more likely to, quote, evaluate what certain experiences have in common and not whether or not we value them or dislike them. So that really goes hand in hand with what I was saying, is that while thinkers might take the cake when it comes to establishing the plan and making sure it works, feelers are more aware of making sure that you even want to go in that direction. So do you even value that? Like, are you enjoying the process? Is that result worth it to you? Those sorts of things. So here's another quote that I think is very important. She says, "It is easy to assume that thinking and feeling concern themselves respectively with the processes or with the provinces of reason and emotion. Typologically, however, both thinking and feeling are both methods of reasoning." So I find that very important, and I say this lots of times in my channel, is that both thinking and feeling are both just as valid of a way to make a decision. It really just depends on what you're deciding about. Whereas feeling is going to be deciding way more based on your values and people and, you know, your own like ethical code, perhaps. Thinking is focused on, you know, honestly putting two blocks together and seeing the cause and effect there, where sometimes you're just putting blocks together and you don't even realize how much you hate what you're doing. Whereas sometimes, like for a feeler, you're doing what you love and you cannot figure out how to put the blocks together to make it even work. So those are kind of the two extremes there. But hopefully that can help you illustrate that, or that illustrates it a little bit. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about, at least in this video, is judging and perceiving. Because in general, a lot of things that I read online about judgers and perceivers, I find to be a little bit vague, and I really liked the way that this was described. It made me really see myself in the J descriptions, which was great. So let's talk about the P types. These are, again, just the bullet points in the book. P types. They never feel they have enough information to decide and may seek new options even after deciding. They react fully and quickly to whatever happens to catch their attention. They're ready for anything but may depend too much on chance and circumstance. They resist structure. They may not start a project until motivated by the arrival of a deadline. They may take on too many projects or keep going until they're overloaded and unable to do it all. They may experience their emotions as physical states and become run down. They are curious, adaptable masters of improvisation, but may not follow through or stick to something very long. They are enthusiastic, engaged. They can be reckless. They may not consider risks or time constraints when drawn to something exciting. So now on to the J types. J's may decide before all the facts are in or limit their options just to have things settled and off their minds. They want to know what's going to happen so they can prepare for it. They are self-motivated and may be unprepared to deal with the unexpected. They prefer structure, will organize time and efforts to meet goals and deadlines. They do exactly what they say they're going to do and will negotiate if more time is required. They may not be aware of their physical needs until they have a real problem. They are responsible, firm, true to their word, but may be unwilling to change even when things are going badly. They are decisive, committed, and determined, and they can be controlling, may take on authority instinctively, certain that they know what needs to be done. This is so interesting to me because, I only ever hear P's and J's talked about as like, are you really messy or are you not, or something. And this right here is so freaking true, and it's all based in, extroverted judge, like looking at like extroverted judging as a thing, and not just like the sort of symptoms of what it seems like J's and P's do. Again, this doesn't really have much to do with conscientiousness, maybe a little bit. I understand why someone would throw that in there, but what I really like is it says about the J types that J's are self-motivated but may be unprepared to deal with the unexpected. That's been my thing, is that I'm very self-motivated. If I have all the time in the world, then I would just do my thing. I would just go toward goals. Like, I have a lot that I want to do. I don't really need to be told what to do. I don't really need to be shaped, and I don't really need a structure to tell me what to do. It's so much easier for me to tell others what to do. But at the same time, because I have ventured in entrepreneurship, when things don't go as expected, I can get very overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed by the unknown, and so that's why I spend so much time in my NI to try and figure out what to expect. And so whenever this says may be unwilling to change, even when things are going badly, this reminded me, especially as a ENFJ, like with my FE, that I am fiercely loyal. Like, if I am someone's friend, I want to be their friend, like, till the end, even if they hurt me and stuff. And I'm thinking about how hard it's been for me to, like, quit a job that I know wasn't for me. And in the past, in a relationship that wasn't making me happy, like, I would stay in it even though I didn't want to be in it. It's just so hard. Like, that's the thing that I do think is very true about, FJs, unfortunately, that we can struggle with, is that we can almost ignore our own feelings, because the way that our feeling is, it's like we're focused on being happier in the end. We're focused on goals that we value that make us happy, but it's so hard to change if we realize that something is not making us happy. And on the other hand, I notice that FPs will just dip out if something makes them unhappy, which, can be very hurtful to people too, because sometimes it does take work, and FJs are willing to do the work. So here's an anecdote about how J and P tendencies first started, in a way. So, quote, for hunter-gatherers, P traits are crucial to survival. Rapidly shifting attention, hands-on intelligence, and hair-trigger responses ensured the ability to exploit opportunity and to defend against predators in dangerous prehistoric environments. J traits, by contrast, developed in more secure environments, which encouraged more focused attention, structural maintenance, and the development of long-term goals. I thought that was very interesting, and it reminded me of how I've talked before about NE, whenever NE feels as though they are being crazy and that they're making something up, I often tell my NP friends that, you know, if you're in the wild and you heard what sounded like just the wind and you didn't turn around because you thought, oh, it's nothing, it's just wind, then you might just keep going, and then you might get eaten by a tiger or something. I don't know. And I think that NE, there is a real purpose in NE, even if you're wrong, even if the possibility is wrong. Thinking it could be wind or it could be a tiger, and like turning around and checking it out could save your life. And I think that, you know, as far as the NE, like NPs go, that is a great example. Like, clearly you can look at this and think that it's the SPs that are like killing the food and like fighting off, you know, threats. But, you know, NE, it's almost like it could be overly paranoid, or like think about the possibles, like the bad possibilities, and prevent against it, things like that. And so last thing I want to talk about regarding J and P is that there was an anecdote in there about how we experience freedom differently, and that J types find it to be freeing to have like a set plan that they're going toward, whereas P types don't find that freeing. P types don't want any constraints, any plans. They are afraid to commit to things. But J types think that if you don't like commit to anything, then pretty much you're committing to being in the moment forever and having to improvise forever, which for a J feels like you're stuck. You're stuck with whatever the present moment throws you. And so that doesn't feel like free will. It doesn't feel like freedom. A J wants to outsmart the present moment in a way. So I think that's really all I want to talk about in regards to that. Or maybe I should read off that part. Oh, I'm going to just read this part really quick. P types generally misunderstand a judging approach as restrictive and controlling. From their perspective, J types are conformist, intent on imposing the very limitations that the P types regard as dull. It's important to recognize that this distinction between P types as free spirits and J types as authority freaks is a stereotype. All types cherish freedom. All types crave. Hey guys, sorry, my camera on my phone really does not want to let me record a video that long, and it's really frustrating, so I'm probably going to need to get a camera soon. I just wanted to record this ending really quick because I swear I was just about to wrap up. But I just was going to say that I've done lots of freelance projects in the past where I as a J have felt like I didn't have the freedom to choose which projects that really mattered to me, what I really wanted to focus on, and I felt like I had no choice. Like, I was in a place, I guess, financially where I felt like I had no choice but to take on whatever project came to me. And when that happened, I almost felt like I had to act like an ENFP, and I had to just make it work. And I felt very trapped. I felt like I could not choose the projects that I wanted to invest in, and I had no choice but to just keep up with so many projects at once. I was so overwhelmed. So that kind of illustrates the J and P thing. And really, all I wanted to say to end this video is that let me know if there's anything in this that resonates with you. I mostly talked about sort of these dichotomies of feeling and thinking, extroverting and introverting, sensing and intuition, judging and perceiving. And I know that I didn't really get into the cognitive functions, but I want to know, do you feel like these dichotomies resonate with you? Because personally, as an ENFJ, all of those resonated with me, and that's not always the case with dichotomies. So I thought that that was really interesting, and I want to know from you guys if you think that your type resonates with those dichotomies as defined. Thank you for those of you who've been following along with this typology reading challenge. Again, the February book is Susan Storm's Discovering You, and that will be linked below. If you want to be typed by me, or if you want mentorship by me, that is also in the description below. Subscribe if you want to keep up with videos like these and with the whole reading challenge. And I've also made a playlist that is going to be at the end of this video with the rest of the Typology Reading Challenge videos. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.